Welcome, Dr. Weber, Assemblywoman of the 79th District. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Okay, and I know you're super busy, and I appreciate you taking the time to allow us to get to know you in your leadership journey in preparation for our annual Women's Leadership Summit.
Which sounds amazing that you're having a summit on women, and the leadership issue is really important for women.
It is, it is. I decided to do this a few years ago, given that California is a leader in so many things. San Diego has so many powerful women that are doing things not just in our city, but statewide, such as yourself. So I'm excited to hear your story and share it with our attendees and our network of subscribers.
Well, thanks for inviting me and taking that interest. Well, I think the biggest challenge always is to try to be true to what you believe in and why you came there. It's very easy to get distracted, to get turned around, and to get caught up in the power of the positions. And you have to stay focused, and that's really one of the hardest things I find for most folks in the assembly, and even for myself, to not really get caught up in me, into the power and the position that's there, and stay focused as to how I really came there. I think the greatest accomplishments I've had in the assembly is to really establish kind of what I consider a personal reputation, that people know who you are, they know what you stand for, they know what you fight for. And that's really, for me, very important, because as I address so many critical issues in the state and this community itself, it becomes important that people understand why I do it, what my drive is, and that it's really nothing as a personal attack upon an organization or any of those kinds of things, but it really is coming from a deeper passion and a deeper reality of who I am and the kinds of problems I'm trying to solve. One of the things we took on last year was childcare, to make sure that women had access to childcare, and we increased childcare immensely. We also talked about the disparity in wages between women and men, and trying to make sure that there was some equality in pay, whether in terms of similar jobs, because there are women who are working in major corporations who make a lot less than their counterparts. So we looked at that. So we passed a bill to make that a reality. We're also looking at it in terms of the Capitol itself, because even in our own building, there's such disparity with regards to wages between women who are, if you have the same position, you may be making a lot less. And so we've now got some additional bills to do that. Some of them are beginning to look at who's on many of the boards of corporations in the nation, and whether there's particularly nonprofit boards in California, because those are many of the boards that we give nonprofit status to. We have some vested interest in terms of tax loopholes, in terms of them being able to survive, and yet we have not demanded from them the same level of diversity in terms of their boards, whether it's women, people of color, those kinds of things. So the Women's Caucus has begun to address a lot of the issues that are there, as well as creating some opportunities through our STEM programs, those kinds of things, beginning to grow it early on with regards to young women and getting them into these various programs. So we're conscious of it, we're working on it. It's quite a challenge, because there are many, as you probably know, layers of this that's institutionalized, and so we want to make sure that we begin to address that. One of the things, even little things like at the Capitol, we base current office, on past salaries. Well, if the institution has basically advantaged men, and we're bringing women in to do the same job, and we look at their past salary and make that the basis and the conversation as to where we start with pay, then once again, women are going to be the victims of past discrimination. And so we have a bill now that says you can't ask about one's past salary when you're interviewing them for a job, because that in itself, once again, will hinder women and keep them out of the same salary range as men. Well, it's kind of a strange career, I think, to a certain extent. I've spent 40 years as a professor at San Diego State University. Because in my heart, I'm a teacher, always a teacher. And so that was my journey. That's where I came from. But it's interesting that in the process of that, mainly because I think I was instrumental in the founding of the Africana Studies Department, and served in some capacity early on with women's studies and Chicano studies, and got involved in the development of those institutions. It made me do more politics than I probably had thought I'd ever do in my life with regards to dealing with the academic senate and the communities and those kinds of things. And so as a result of that, I not only taught at the university, but had quite a political engagement kind of activity occurring with me and the various communities, not on campus, but also off campus, which then led me to obviously become a member of the school board, because when the vacancy came, people looked around and said, who could do this? Who's an advocate? And they said, oh, Shirley's an advocate. And the university's lifestyle in terms of teaching gives you the flexibility to alter your schedule, adjust your schedule, so you can do things like serve on the school board. And so I got on the school board, and out of that propelled me into other kinds of political discussions and engagements with politicians and others. I only stayed 2 terms because that's what I committed to do, because I was still a university professor who wanted to finish my career at the university, which I did. And but in the process, I was still engaged in educational issues with the African American educators, making sure that the school board was doing certain things on behalf of kids, being an advocate locally and nationally, serving on a number of national boards and those kinds of things. So I knew how to deal with the politics and how to get things done, how to participate with elected officials, and knew most of the elected officials in the city. So after I retired from the university and thought I was going to enter my good life, it was at that point that the current speaker of the assembly, came to me and asked if I would run for the state assembly. I had no intentions of ever running for the state assembly. I'd been asked many, many years ago when my kids were little, and I thought, oh, I can't do this. I can't go to Sacramento every week and leave my children home. So I said no. But, you know, being asked this time, I still said no, because I felt there was someone else who was more interested in being a politician and who had prepared themselves. But when I looked around, I realized that in my community that I came from, there were very few individuals who were active in the community, who had the heart of the community, who could actually win the seat. And I was probably the only one with those attributes who could really get in and actually win. There were a lot of good people, but they didn't know the political structure. They didn't know folks across the city. They didn't know the people you needed to know to win. And I realized at some point that if I wanted my community to have a voice, I would have to run. And so I ran and won. You know, when I was in 12th grade in high school, I had a woman who gave me a card. She was an English teacher, and she did all those little diagrams they used to do back in the day, the grammatical things. She gave me something that I still have today, which is almost a half a century later. She gave me this thing, and it was from Hamlet, and it was Polonius talking to his son, and it says, "Above all things, to thine own self be true." And I've never forgotten that. That's the one thing I've always tried to do, is that to be true to myself. Because in the end, you are the one that you have to go to sleep with at night. And you're the one who has to toss over whether or not you've done the right thing or the wrong thing. And you are the person who you have to see in the mirror every morning. And you have to like that person. And you have to make sure that you've not become this monster that you didn't want to be, that you've done some things that haunt you at night about hurting other people, that you really have done the best you can. And so I would say to all of you, as they said in Hamlet, above all things, to thine own self be true.